Welcome, everyone. Our topic for today is 1 page or 2,000 pages, what to look for in a board pack. And our speaker today is Lucy McClements. Lucy's an independent non-exec director at Mansfield Building Society and a board member for the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority. She's also an accountant and a qualified executive coach. Lucy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and welcome everybody. So when Sarah asked me to speak, I was thinking, well, what's the funny thing about board packs? And I was thinking about the different types of board packs that I've seen. Basically, I've seen everything from a board pack that is 1 page, I'm not joking you, 1 page, which was the agenda, through to a board pack which was 2,000 pages and everything in between. So I feel that I've got quite a good bit of energy and experience to be able to bring to this. So I hope you find it interesting. I think there's kind of 3 key areas I wanted to just touch on. The first is around when I'm reading a board pack, I'm always thinking, what's the board's purpose? And I'm always hankering myself back to that. So, for example, we know that the purpose of a board is to set strategic direction. We know that the purpose of a board is to hold management to account, to have that oversight role. We know that the board's purpose is to set tone from the top and set that ethical leadership. It's also about managing key risks, and it's also about ensuring that the organisation meets its regulatory and legal responsibilities. So I always have that in mind when I'm reading a board pack. It's really easy sometimes to get lost in what's put in front of you because of what's just been put in front of you. You think, this is what I need to focus on. Not necessarily. Actually, I'm thinking back to what's my role as a non-executive director, what's the purpose of the board, and how do these papers help me to implement the board's purpose? Fundamentally setting strategic direction. So I've always got that in mind. So that's the first key point. The second area is I'm always thinking, what content do I need to do that? And I think the content falls into probably 3 categories. One is around the actual data that you need. So that's hard data. It might be some of the financial data. It might be things like customer service levels. But the second is around things that are more context specific. So for example, if your organization is going through a big project or a big IT transformation, you'd absolutely expect there to be something in the board pack that tells you a bit about it. And the third area in terms of content that I'm looking for is that sort of forward-looking, outward-looking piece. So I'm looking at things like scenario analysis. I'm thinking about, well, what's our risk tolerance? How much risk do we want to take in relation to this? I'm thinking about, well, what's the future economic environment going to do to our strategy or what we've just been told in this pack? If interest rates are going to fall, what's that going to do to our profitability or whatever it might be? So I think there's a whole range of outward-looking pieces that you need to be really focused on and don't often find their way into a board pack, but it's incumbent on you to either do some of that research beforehand or to try and bring some of that out within the meeting. One of the things I found really frustrating when I went to one board was the executive had not really put any kind of recommendation or alternatives. They just sort of plonked it down on a page and said, this is it. The profitability is this, the finances are this, the customers are saying this. There was nothing really saying, well, this is what we need to do about it. This is how we change things. This is how we move forward. And that told me quite a lot about the executive team and told me quite a lot about the culture in the organisation, that they were waiting to be told by the board what the answer was. And it's well, actually, the executive need to be empowered to take this board forward and to give them the information that they need. So I was really keen to see some recommendations and some alternatives and some kind of discussion around that. So that really helped. And the third area is one of my favourite words when I talk in the boardroom, and it's about triangulation, which is a word that I learned when I met an actuary, which might sound quite funny, but the actuaries, they triangulate. They're triangulating claims predominantly. But what I mean in a board context is that putting together all of the different pieces of the jigsaw. So what I do in board evaluations is I'm trying to say, what have people told me? So either through a questionnaire or through an interview, what do I actually observe when I might see them sit in a meeting? And then what have I read in the papers? And putting all of those things together, plus the information I might know from previous knowledge or from other organisations or other boards, and bringing that all together. So I think it's really important as a non-exec to do that stand back piece, to think, what are the gaps here? What are the inconsistencies maybe? But also, what's the stand back story? Because it can be so easy to get lost in the detail of the board pack and the individual specifics. Is actually standing back and saying, what does this mean? What are we missing? What could we do differently moving forward? And I just wanted to tell you a couple of stories really before I finish. One around a board where they'd had quite a lot of challenge from the regulator about the quality of their risk management framework. And what was interesting was that they'd not really spent much time talking about strategy. They got lost in all of the regulatory and legal pieces of the board's work, and they weren't really focused on the customer. They weren't really focused on where they were going. And I think that's a really important part of a board paper, is getting some kind of a strategic update and oversight. Maybe a strategic scorecard or strategic KPIs can be really, really helpful. And the other example goes back to my 2,000 pages. And people said to me, I can't believe you waded through a year's worth of 2,000 pages of board. And it was fascinating because it really didn't tell you much, but there was a lot of needles in that haystack. And what I realised was that actually the executive were trying to obfuscate. So they were trying to avoid talking about the stuff that was important. They were just churning out what they'd all discussed at the ground level. And they weren't thinking strategically. And they also didn't want to highlight some of the issues that really the board should have been asking them. And so for me, that 2,000 pages was give it to the non-execs and see if they can find a needle in a haystack. And that was really, really poor. But on the other side, I had a board where literally we had one page and it was the agenda. And that made it really difficult as well, because I was thinking, I don't know where we're going here. I don't know what we're trying to achieve. I don't know how the business is currently going. It was all done through verbal discussion. And that made it really difficult because you felt like some of it was just hearsay. Where were the facts? Where was the information in front of you, that the cold hard facts that you could use to make decisions? So those are a couple of the examples. Just to recap, I think 3 key areas. One, always have in your mind what's the purpose of the board and how can I read the papers with that purpose in mind. The second is around, what content do I need and maybe what's missing. So you need to make sure you've got all the data you need. You need to have all of the context-specific information, but also thinking outward-looking, forward-looking. And finally, triangulate. So put together all of the pieces. So it's not just about what you read in those papers. It's also about what the management might tell you. It's also about what you might observe if you're out and about with the organisation. But it's also what you might learn from other organisations or from your previous experience. Putting that together is what makes you a fantastic non-exec. And that is what the stand back piece that will make you excellent and add value as a non-exec. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for your time and for thinking that through for us and for sharing some stories of your own experience there as well. I'm going to share some questions now. Think about a story about a lightbulb moment that came from reading a board pack. Remind us all why this is so important. How did this insight enhance board decision making? Secondly, do papers relating to the board discharging its legal and regulatory requirements get in the way of board being truly effective? How do you balance that commercial, customer, regulatory triangle there? And thirdly, how do you get the information you need when it isn't in the board pack? And how do you manage that? Just have a think about your own board pack experiences before we jump into breakout rooms.